So I want to talk about the importance of triggers in your life. If you want a stable emotional state, if you want a happy emotional state, if you want to create your emotional state, then identifying the triggers that you have in your life is essential, because then it helps us deal with them. See, we all have triggers, whether positive or negative. And triggers are things that kind of stimulate you to feel a certain way, to react a certain way. But the problem is that most of it is unconscious. And this means that we don't notice that we have these triggers, or that these triggers are influencing how we feel and how we act. And they're there because our mind works in a way that wants to create efficiency. It wants to protect us. So first of all, when you're in a situation, it's constantly assessing the situation, identifying that if it has an emotional attachment to this, or what it thinks about this, and things of that sort. But it also does it to say, hey, do we need to be protected from this? Do we need to be alert from this because it might impact us in a positive or negative way? So it's constantly assessing your situations. So our brain is almost like a little road map, and all those roads might lead to something else. For example, a smell might help us remember maybe have nostalgia when we were little kids and our parents used to cook something. So we might walk into a restaurant, might smell like a specific food, and might bring us back to that. It might create happiness within us. So it can be a smell, a place, a person. It can be something of that sort that creates a trigger within some of the associations that we might have already. So the best we can identify them, we can stop them from snowballing sometimes. We can stop them from impacting us, and we can help change them. So what you need to do is that if you're in a situation, whether it's a conversation with someone, or whether you're in a place, or whether you are seeing something or doing something, listening to something, you got to assess if for some reason you're happy and then you shift to being frustrated, you shift to being angry, you shift to being sad or anxious, or you experience fear. What is triggering that? And this happens sometimes with people who experience trauma. If there's a song playing in the background, for example, or if there was a specific smell of a plant, it brings them back to that situation. So it doesn't just have to be traumatic experiences. It can be different experience. Maybe you had an argument with a significant other, and there's a song playing in the background. It was a very emotional situation. Your brain starts recording all those little things and start associating with them. Or maybe you had somebody that you were dating who had a specific cologne or perfume, and that person then did something that very wrong to you. And in the future, you might meet someone else, and that smell might impact how you see another person, even though they have nothing to do with that original person. So again, identify, am I feeling this way? All of a sudden, I change my emotional state. What is making me feel this way? Is it a trigger that it might have in my environment? It might be a person or situation or sound or something like that. And if you can connect the dots sometimes, you can then replace it. You can also, instead of trying to connect the dots, what are these things is also maybe create your own triggers. For example, I have people that would call me that would create a lot of stress in my life. So as soon as I see these different people calling me, it would trigger a response of stress. So what did I do? I changed the trigger with those people by simply changing the image that appeared when they would call me. For example, something that brings happiness to my life is my daughter. So I put an image of me and her and these different people when they would call me. When I would look at when the phone call would come in, I would look at it and say, oh, and it would bring me back to that situation. So then the trigger wasn't there anymore. So I replaced it with it. Maybe you have a trigger with another situation in your environment. Maybe it's a place that you go to. Maybe it's even like an elevator or whatever it may be that triggers an emotional response. So how do you shift that? One thing is exposure. The more you're exposed to something, and if it has to do a little bit at a time, the less triggered you might be if it was something traumatic or something that might have happened. Also, another thing is to visualize. So visualize the situation going well visualize a great conversation. If it's someone that you want to talk to, but there's a negative rapport there before, and then as soon as you start talking, it triggers you to get defensive. So maybe visualizing a positive conversation. Maybe it's you having fear, speaking somewhere or talking to someone or going somewhere or whatever it may be. Maybe visualizing yourself doing that. Because again, if you create it in your mind doesn't know the difference between if it was fake or not. So by visualizing it in a positive way, you're changing some of those triggers. Once you start noticing these triggers, it kind of snowballs, because then unconsciously, your mind will start looking for those triggers, and your mind will look for ways to make them change, which comes down to just having that emotional intelligence to know yourself good enough to understand then what those triggers are and then replacing them with something else. Hope that helps.